and welcome to this afternoon's session, Women in Afghanistan, Engagement or Abandonment. I'm Christiana Jones. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a student at Royal Roads in the Masters of Professional Communication program. First, I would like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from the unceded territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, who have a long-standing relationship with the land and waters from time immemorial that continues to this day. Our moderator today is Colette Derworiz. Colette is an award-winning journalist with over 18 years of experience covering topics including politics and social issues for the Calgary Herald. She currently works for the Canadian Press in Edmonton. Colette has a personal connection to the topic today, as she was both a colleague and personal friend of Michelle Lang, who was the first and only Canadian journalist to die in the Afghanistan war in 2009. Thank you so much for first allowing us to share that story, and of course for moderating today. A few housekeeping notes. Colette will introduce the panelists and each will have some time to speak. After that, we will have some time for questions. If you have a question, please put it in the chat so I can take note and we'll try to get to as many as we can. With that, I will pass it to you, Colette.
Thanks, Christiane. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colette, and welcome to our panel on women in Afghanistan. It's a pretty heavy day with another major international story unfolding in Ukraine, but our panelists today also don't want us to forget about the women in Afghanistan. Our first speaker today is Catherine Lang. Catherine is the aunt of Michelle Lang, who is, as you heard, the only Canadian journalist who was killed reporting on the war in Afghanistan. As one of Michelle's friends, I got to know Catherine after Michelle died, and we have become friends as well. Catherine has worked as a newspaper reporter and a freelance writer and editor. She's also writing a memoir about the loss of Michelle. Catherine is also a member of the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, and she joins us now. Hi, Catherine.
Hi, Colette.
Nice to see you again. So we'll jump right in. How well do you think the media is covering the human rights crisis in Afghanistan, particularly as it relates to women and girls?
Well, I wanted to just make a few brief remarks about the major international news today with Vladimir Putin beginning to invade Ukraine, and just understanding that that is clearly going to dominate international news for some time. I wanted to mention that I think it's important that we still keep ourselves informed about what's going on in Afghanistan, and I think it probably will become more difficult as the world's attention turns away. I've been researching for the last little while how the media is doing, and I think that international and American media have been doing a much better job than Canadian media in general, although Eastern Canadian news platforms do seem to be keeping on top of the story to some extent. A lot of the focus is on the humanitarian crisis and our government's failure to provide safe passage to Afghans who helped us during our mission there. And I'm disappointed that there wasn't more coverage in the years and months leading up to the US withdrawal of troops. I think if more attention had been paid, perhaps there might have been a different outcome. In any case, we'll never know whether more media attention could have made a difference in that respect. But as you've mentioned, Michelle was my niece, and so our family has paid a difficult price. Nothing anywhere near what the Afghan civilian population has and continues to. The human rights crisis in Afghanistan, particularly against women and girls right now, is is so distressing and overwhelming. And I think it's really important that we keep their stories alive. And there are lots of ways to get that information in this digital age. You know, there has been coverage of some of the disappearances and, of course, girls' inability to go to school. Afghan journalists, as I'm sure Farida will tell us, are at grave risk. Many have been killed. And our troops fought over there. This generation of Canadians, we went to war. I don't know how we can look away.
Thanks, Catherine. You talked about your personal stake in monitoring the news in Afghanistan. Could you tell us a little more about that and why you think media advocacy is important?
Yeah, Michelle's death hit me really hard because I had also worked as a reporter and I felt passionate about the profession when I was in it. And she cared about a lot of things. She cared about people. She wanted to tell the stories of Afghan people and had planned on visiting the Kabul office of Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan. And I found out about that shortly after her death. So I began to learn more about the organization and the work that they're doing. And if it hadn't been for my involvement in that organization, I'm not sure that I would have been able to understand better why women's education is so important. So I have Michelle to thank for that. I know Murwarid will speak more on those points, but yeah, Canadians paid a big price. Again, I know it pales in comparison to the price that Afghans have told, but I do feel that media advocacy and keeping the spotlight on what's going on there is of vital importance. The war on so-called war on terror has not gone away. Afghanistan, if we can help the women rise up, perhaps someday, not necessarily in our lifetime, but maybe it won't be a failed state forever. I think the women there have a critical role to play, but we have to show them that we stand in solidarity with them. And one way to do that is by keeping their stories alive.
Thank you, Catherine. Our second panelist is someone I'm just getting to know, but I hope to get to know a lot better. Murwarid Ziayee is the Senior Director of the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan, and I believe she is based in Calgary. She is responsible for program management and supporting public engagement, outreach, and fund development. She maintains a close connection with the office in Kabul. She's also worked with the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan as a National Human Rights Officer, and she has worked closely with the Afghan Ministry of Women's Affairs. There's more details about these amazing women on the bio page, so please do check the details there. But in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep us moving along. Welcome, how are you today?
Good, thank you. How are you today?
Good, thank you. So Murwarid, how dire is the situation with regards to human rights and the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan right now?
Thank you, Colette. And before I get into your question, I would like to just say a few words to Catherine. I'm sorry for your loss and pray for Michelle and whoever from Canadian citizens who lost their life in Afghanistan to bring peace, to bring security and human rights in the country. They will be in our memories and our prayers. And about the situation, the human rights and humanitarian situation, the country is facing multiple crises. There are systematic human rights violations. a growing humanitarian crisis, a state of economic contraction, dysfunctional banking and financial system, a failure of diplomacy to form an inclusive government, a government that respects human rights and restore girls' and women's right to education and employment. Everyday violence such as house searches, target killings, illegal detention, beating and lashing out on the streets, and forced relocations are happening. According to United Nations recent report, over 100 former Afghan military forces and government officials were killed between August 2021 to January 2022. Over 10 civil society activists and journalists have been killed in this period, while over 100 women and civil society activists have been illegally detained and tortured. About 124,000 people have been evacuated during the past 6 months, most of whom are highly educated and highly skilled and professionals, which results brain drain in Afghanistan. The country as a whole, as well as the cities and even down to the districts and communities, faces a huge decentralization system. And what it means, this means that every Talib with a gun sets the rules for his community. It particularly affects women. In some areas, women are not allowed to leave the house without a man from their family. In some other places, women are not allowed to leave the house without having a burqa or fully covered from top to head to toe. The Taliban's first directive restricted access to education for women and girls by closing secondary and high school and also universities in September 2021. Over 4 million children, 60% of girls were already out of school, and 5 million more girls lost access to education after Taliban's announcement for school closure. 9 out of 10 people cannot meet their calorie needs, and 23 out of 38 million people are at risk of starvation. More than half of children under 5 suffer from severe malnutrition. Some parents have sold their body organs like kidneys, and some sold their daughters as young as 9 months to feed the rest of the family only for a few weeks to keep them alive. Now, even 6 months after the Taliban took control of the country remains in uncertain state as a result of multiple political, economic, and humanitarian crises. Afghanistan and its people have gone through so much in the past 6 months, and the country cannot afford to lose more. While there is a need for immediate humanitarian assistance, and we all see that, and as Catherine said, this is something that mostly comes through media. The need for restoring human rights is equally important. Until women are not allowed to work to resume their employment, they continue to face food insecurity for themselves and for their children.
What do you see as the role for Canadian media and the government to respond to this crisis?
So I believe that media is very powerful, and media can have a huge impact on keeping Afghanistan in the center of attention of government of Canada and also international community. I was living in Afghanistan when Taliban took over the country the first time. And there was no access. We didn't have access to internet, to mobile phone or landline or media or even public outside Afghanistan. So we were unable to show the atrocities committed by Taliban at that time. We were deprived of all our rights, including the right to leave our houses as women. Now things are different. People from inside the country share stories and photos and videos through social media and or personal contacts, even in a small scale. So and it can reach to public ear. Listening to those stories, sharing those stories through public ear with the international media, with Canadian media, is the role of the public. I go one step further to say that it's public's role also. I believe that the public's interest actually drive the media and demand the accountability from government. So here people can speak out and provide a platform for Afghans, an idea for emphasize on the importance of public engagement with media to keep Afghanistan in the news. Meanwhile, ask what government can do. Government can there are many things that Canadian government can do now. Like they announced SIM process, the special immigration measure for Afghans, which is very important, and we appreciate that. But it's a long process. It's very with lots of paperwork. So waiving some of the paperwork will speed up the process. The other thing that government of Canada can do is to engage or arrange with the countries in the neighborhood to allow Afghans to open their doors for Afghans who are at risk to relocate safely there, and also play at diplomacy and active diplomacy to pressure Taliban to form an inclusive government. By inclusive, I don't mean like to have a symbolic role for this and that. It's a meaningful participation of women, minority group, and scholars and political parties. So we ask first the public to support our advocacy work for human rights to education, in delivering education programs for Afghans. And also we say that we don't leave Afghanistan in this darkest time, and we need media, government, and public on our side.
Thank you. Our final panelist has some firsthand insight into Afghanistan. Farida Naqsad is an award-winning journalist and the director of the Center for the Protection of Afghan Women Journalists. She has more than 20 years of experience in journalism, both nationally and internationally. She has covered human rights issues, especially women's rights, and has always fought as a defender of women's journalists and freedom of expression. Welcome, Farida, both to today's panel and also to Canada. She's only been here for a few months.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. First of all, I just would like to have my condolence and just for the solidarity with Ms. Catherine because of Mashal, which is really remembering something that she did for Afghanistan. I'm sorry that, but of course, it was not only Mashal. There is a number of journalists and internationalists that because of the Afghanistan or terrorists fighting against terrorists, they lost their selves. Yeah, thank you.
So this is very important for all our panelists, I think. Tell us more about the situation on the ground in Afghanistan, Farida.
Actually, I think Murwarid mentioned somehow about the situation of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the situation in Afghanistan is really, really getting worse than last decades, or I should say like for more than 2 decades, because it was unaccepted, something that suddenly happened. It affects on all of Afghanistan people, but mostly for the women, it means for women activists and women, those they are really work for the long time and fight. They give sacrifice, they struggle for something that they count as an achievement for the long time. Unfortunately, they're all suffering from different aspects of life, security and insecurity, and their safety. Even they are facing like mental problem. It's not only, you know, women, it means women activists or human rights activists, or like, let's talk about these students, how it's difficult. A girl, just her mother, her family just tried their best. Even their economic was not something like they could provide for the education that they were hopeful for the better future for their children. All the doors of the education, the schools or universities closed. And the restriction for the education, it is really concerning. It's really painful for the women and especially for girls. And the other side, if you see the crisis which is going recently, in terms of behavior, in terms of any injustice, in terms of all the violations, discriminations, torture, killing, it means even stoning. There are a number of women. Just recently, I got a news in 2 months we are witness to field court. It means every day the average of crime, crisis, violations is getting increased. Unfortunately, there is no any system, any punishment or any attention to Afghanistan. That is why the Afghanistan people really need for the attention of the international community. And it is very important that Afghanistan should not be forgotten, because I should say that the international community also, they're responsible. We have more than 40 countries under the umbrella of NATO that they just came they have commitment to support human rights, especially women's rights and press freedom in Afghanistan. But nowadays, everyone is silent. They make silence in terms of any violations. Even the international convention violated by Taliban, nobody just think about what should be like reaction. I think this is very important that in such situation, especially Afghanistan and Afghanistan women should not be forgotten, because a number of civilian killed, a number of national army killed, a number of journalists killed, civil society activists killed, human rights activists killed, grassroots women killed. And also, on the other side, the international military, because they also did some sacrifice. But finally, what is the result? Who is responsible? What should be next step for the saving of Afghanistan from such situation? And how we should bring women in a peace atmosphere. Of course, it will be difficult. We take out all of women or women activists or journalists. But now the time, how we should make peaceful floor for them. Humanitarian assistance, that should not forget it. This is beside of the human right or human crisis, we have economic crisis. In the history of Afghanistan, I was never witness that a person sell her or his organs, a part of organs, or their children to survive or support or save the other member of families, which we witnessed with this. So I should point, this is responsibility of the media, especially international media and journalists, how they should act.
Harita, you talked a little bit in that first part about how a lot of female activists and journalists have left. Could you tell us a little bit about your story on how you left the country and ended up in Canada? I think people would love to hear that.
Oh, it is not easy, but I have to try because
Yeah.
You know, it's really painful. The story is painful. A person more than 20 years fight and struggle and come in a stage that should, I was like hopeful for a better future. I was thinking positive. I never think that it's up in a minute. I was like, for 3 or 4 months, I wasn't, I'm in Canada, but still I was thinking that I am dreaming something. But this is the reality, what is going to happen in Afghanistan. Because the situation, as I mentioned, I was waiting for the official position of Taliban. Even in the beginning, I had many offers. I just say no, because I never prefer to leave Afghanistan or do asylum in another country. Maybe you know that I travel more than 40 countries. I have been many times in different countries, in the United States, United Kingdom, even in Canada. I have been in 2007. Or I was committed to work, to be in my country, in my homeland. I share my experience with the new generation, with the junior journalists and students, which really needed. That is why we just think that we will stay there. And as a head of the Center for the Protection of Afghan Women Journalists, we start supporting much more. But unfortunately, while I watch and see the position of Taliban, two things I note. One, they didn't speak about their position for the commitment to press freedom or support of journalists or allowing to presence of women journalists in the media. Secondly, they were like announced general amnesty, but unfortunately, while they announced this, everyone was like hopeful that, but the morning we were witness of a number of violations, torture, killing at the midnight. So it means I just say no, they are not changed. They are worse than before. So I was thinking about my daughter future. Then I decide I have to leave. I just lived in an urgent case. I have left all of my family still they are left behind in Afghanistan, including my husband. I am here, I'm trying to get him. Still, I am just as usual. I am trying and fighting, but I'm happy. I have this space, the privacy. I should have my voice to talk about, at least do advocacy, lobby, to have the Afghan woman voice and message for the international community. And the other end, save my daughter, which I was never a good mother. I was always prefer I should give priority to my duty and my professional work. But it was the first time I think no. Now it is the time that I should give something specific attention to her. And she's happy, I am happy. And despite of all these problems, I'm very happy. I have this space. I joined the Carleton, and I'm very thankful from the Carleton University that they make this possible. At least I am start as a journalist, my work here, and I will learn much more in research and the professional work. I hope do my master's here as well that I had applied. So this is something like, it was not easy. To be honest, it is really very painful. While I left, I think I left my country behind. I left even my culture, you know, it's not much similarity, but even my friends, my office, my all hard work experience, which was Afghanistan, and the north, east, west. I traveled about 20 provinces of Afghanistan. I conduct different programs for journalists, and also as a civil society activist. All the time I traveled. I never think about my safety. I was the only woman could travel and create 3 radio stations in 3 different provinces. I trained journalists, include of Kabul, in different parts of Afghanistan. It was not easy. It was very risky. It was dangerous. I just do it. When I decide to come, it means I leave Afghanistan. A person always just hobbied with the activities, monitoring, observing. It means working, advocacy for struggle for the press freedom, and especially for the protection of Afghan women journalists. I left my staff behind. I left my provincial reporters behind. I was like cried for a long time, but I never forget them. I still did advocacy. I just could make possible their evacuation in some countries, and still I am advocacy and the plant. I am thankful from the RSF and IFJ and also JHR. They are at least supporting Afghanistan, especially the priorities, the human rights defenders and civil society activists, journalists and women. This is very important, but still we need this support for Afghan women. They are not in a situation because day by day we see and we watch the restriction against women is kind of really increased, and it's really concerning for the other people. And they are expected that international community should not forget them. And when I left Afghanistan, it was my commitment that from any tribune, any possible ways, I will at least have the message, a direct and indirect. I will do support them to make the floor at least peaceful for the in Afghanistan or outside the Afghanistan. This is the things that I have learned. Unfortunately, currently, in 6 months, more than 90% of women journalists sit at home, while 95% of these women were responsible for their running their social life and for daily survival, by their earning only. We, unfortunately, more than 80% of the media organization, it is closed. The very serious restriction is going to continue now against journalists. There is, unfortunately, lack of the access to information. It is, unfortunately, the very serious restriction. Even the journalist or media owner can't invite the analysts to talk about any injustice of Taliban. They are recognizing them, then they are taking out from her house, and then they're torturing or even they're killing them. A number of civil society young women arrested, while 3 months before I have the news, a number of women were arrested. Then a family, I have that, they killed their daughter because they rape and sexual abuse. Then they says, in case she get pregnant, it will be a big issue for us. So I'm coming to the point again. This is the time the rule of international media and journalists, because they have the possibility, they have the facilities, and they have the rights, because Taliban don't behave with international journalists like Afghanistan they are doing with the Afghan journalists. I think if any question, maybe I talk more.
I was just going to ask you a bit more about the role of the international media, and it sounds like you've summed it up quite nicely, that they need to do the things that perhaps can't be done on the ground anymore.
Yes, exactly. I just one point. There is only based on the news. This is not now the breaking news. Breaking news gone. As a professional journalist, we need follow-up. We need investigation. How many media or international media or journalists publish their research or investigation? I didn't see now. 6 months. In terms of human crisis, in terms of media situation, in terms of women's rights, only news. We have to be real journalists based on the facts, based on the documentation. We should go through the reportage. We should go to the feature stories. We should investigation stories. We should talk with the people. This is important that we should follow up. Otherwise, at the beginning, it was good. And especially in Canada, when I know it's about in the last month, nowadays, Afghanistan forget it. Because of the crisis in Ukraine or Russia and Moscow, because of the protests and demonstration and Ottawa and Canada. But we have to be honest. Afghanistan people still need support, protection, advocacy. The international community should put pressure on Taliban to change their policy and have the participation government and accept the women. They should accept, they must accept, because women are a number of the society in Afghanistan, a large number of society in Afghanistan. Without participation of women, there will be a dictator or press freedom, a dictatorship or a dictatorial system. So it will be not a long life.
Thank you, Farida. I see Christiane is there.
Yes.
I think we're short on time.
Yeah, I'm so
okay.
sorry to jump in.
Oh.
We do have about until 2:45, so we have just about 8 minutes left. And we did have a question in the chat, so I do want to pose that question.
Why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, so the message reads, hello everyone, my name is Murwarid Ziayee. I apologize for the pronunciation there. I am from Afghanistan. I am also the founder and executive director of a nonprofit organization called Women Leaders of Tomorrow. We empower women and girls through education and sports. My question for the Canadian women's organizations, will you consider working with the Taliban if there are no alternatives?
Okay, thank you for the question, Fariba John. Taliban are terrorist groups. Taliban haven't changed. They are the same terrorist group as they were in the 90s. They don't respect, they don't value human rights, women's rights, human dignity. As an organization, for 6 months, we haven't worked, and we don't see any possibility of working with or engaging with Taliban and working with that terrorist group at all. Although it doesn't mean that we are not working for Afghans. We still work for Afghan people inside Afghanistan and in the region, but not engaging with Taliban.
Thank you for that answer. We have a follow-up question as well from Ruthie, I believe. What are the views of the panel regarding the international community working with the Taliban?
If I, jump in, I am very disappointed. I'm mad. I am really sad about some international community, the way they engage with Taliban. They are giving more leverage, more power to Taliban. And that is not a good sign for the people who are suffering inside the country. Until a few months before, you were calling Taliban as a terrorist group. And now removing sanctions over Taliban's movement and inviting them to European countries is not something that Afghans would expect, and really it was unexpected. So this is something that Afghans themselves, as people who live inside the country and outside, don't appreciate, and we always ask the international community to avoid any engagement that empower Taliban, and through this kind of engagement, inviting them to here in Qatar, and I don't know, Russia, Iran, Norway, and other European countries, or Turkey, this will give more leverage, more power to Taliban, and this will not resolve any problem. And if you want to pressurize Taliban, and also I don't believe in sanctions against the people of Afghanistan, but I believe in enforcing sanctions on Taliban, Taliban's assets, Taliban's hardliners, and Taliban's movements around the different countries. These are the things that they should have considered, rather than inviting them and hosting them in the countries like they did in the past. And also, some international media have tried to whitewash Taliban's face, which is absolutely against, I think, journalism, journalistic professionalism. So this has to be like, they should be very neutral in their reporting. They should have presence on the ground, or listen to the stories, real stories coming out of Afghanistan, and report based on that.
Thank you so much. Christian, was there another question there?
Yes, there was one more question, and it is from Ella Harvey, and it is, could you please clarify the situation with the schools? Are there any schools open for young girls?
Murwarid John, you want to answer, or shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. Based my information, some of the schools, only the level of primary school, they're open, in some provinces like Kunduz and Herat, and I think in Bahlan, just few provinces. They just, and also Badakhshan. Of course, they state the restriction, but for the primary, they are just open only these schools in these provinces. I just want to jump, as Murwarid before mentioned, I agree totally with all of that she says. We have to be very careful. One thing that some of the journalists, they try to give like this privilege to the Taliban. For example, I was before yesterday in a panel. One of the photographers, I don't want to say who or from where, she says, now we just know that the war and fight in Afghanistan finish. There's no any fight in Afghanistan anymore. While it was funny for me, and it is not acceptable for me. This is now the other door open for the fights, because indirect fights. The difference is that they did suicide bombing, explosions, and now they're killing people from the backside. It means they're like torturing, they're in the midnight, they're like many others violations and kidnapping, and like this is something like every day we are witness of killing of previous militaries or national armies, authorities, which they are in any provinces, even in Kabul. Civil society activists, human rights activists. So this is something, this is not the fight finish. I think it means it's not got away. It is still the war, and we have to find a solution, how we should finish this war. peacefully, should not affect the civilians. We already gave this sacrifice a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we're almost out of time. So I wanted to thank all the panelists for joining us. I've really learned a lot from you guys. And I hope everyone else has too. Really insightful talk. And Christiana, is that all we need to do at this point?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. I just want to first of all say thank you so much for everyone. This was a really touching and emotional session, and thank you all for being willing to share so openly. That was really meaningful. So thank you for that. For the people in the chats, then we're going to take a quick break before our next and final session of the conference, which is Teaching the Unthinkable, the Holocaust in Children's Literature, which will start at 3 p.m. And we hope to see you then. Until then, thank you again, Colette, and to all the speakers. This has been a really fantastic session.